I'm glad we're here together, all these guys. It's awesome. How many of you were here on Sunday or listened to part one? Okay, I guess who hasn't? All right, just a few. I'll do a quick summary, and then we'll get into what it is that a man does. But first, I just want to set up, again, this idea that there's tons of confusion in our culture. If you don't find a better plan, you will probably drift into one of two things. So last week I shared, 4 things that guys drift into. But if you were just to put it into 2 categories, if you are not working the plan that God gives us with the Holy Spirit working in your life, you will drift to be some male version of a gorilla. You will just be overly macho. You will be loud. You will be dangerous. You will just react to your own feelings and desires, and about the only thing you'll be good for eventually, if we drift in that direction, is that we can actually produce children, but we can't be dads or fathers to them. That's one direction. So if you just need an example, just watch TV, and you can see men who are like this. And often they're known for their habits and behaviors, and those things have nothing to do with masculinity, okay? If you drive a truck or shoot a gun or play sports, it has nothing to do with masculinity. It's something much higher and bigger than that. We'll drift that way. But here's the one that's really popular right now, and we will drift. If we don't go that way, we will drift another direction to an emasculated man who says that there isn't a difference between men and women, and this man will give away his masculine strength over and over and over again. He will give it away to other men, and he will give it away to his wife. He will even give it away to other women in his life. And remember, masculinity is not something that can be taken from you, but it can be given away, okay? So we drift in these directions. And so last Sunday was about lifting up the idea of masculinity so that there might be a better plan in which we can follow. And so what's great is God always gives us help. And if we just need to go to the scripture, so Genesis 1:27, and this verse is on the back of your little handout. The verses, key verses for both messages are on the back. You have slides as well. Genesis 1:27, God is finishing up his masterpiece of creation. He creates mankind, and then he distinguishes male and female, and we're given 2 words, nekabah for female, and zakar is the Hebrew word for male. And zakar isn't just a word that's used to describe a man's plumbing or his physical characteristics, but it's used to describe the way a man is to relate to the world as God relates to the world, okay? The essence of every one of us is that we are image bearers of God. That's where we find our value and meaning. I mean, it just starts right there. We're image bearers of God, but specifically we are gendered image bearers of God who are to be like God in a masculine way in the way we relate to other people. And so you can see the 3 kind of meanings of zakar. They are meant to build upon each other, and one leads to the next, okay? So first is to remember. And it is ironic that part of our definition of what it means to be masculine means to remember, which you can just assume means that we forget, okay? So that's why prayer and reading scripture and being around other men who are moving in the same direction and showing up to things like this, even if you're not getting a ton out of the content, if all you're given in those times is a time of remembering that God's important, it's worth doing, okay? So a man remembers God, he remembers God's ways, he remembers who God says he is, how he's to live in the world, all those things that go with remembering God. As a man remembers, he then moves. And this kind of gets us away from this idea that spirituality is just about us and God. It's not, right? The testing of true faith is always how we live out with other people. And so we remember God, and then we move towards others in a positive way. This is not an aggressive way, it's not a domineering way, but we move in a wise way, okay? And then as we move towards them in a positive way, we're able to make life-giving impact. And this is really where a man should get. We are meant to leave a mark. We are meant to pierce in a good way, to leave a mark, to change things, to have impact, to see life increase, to see people's potential brought out in them. That's what we're called to do. So we remember, we move towards others, and that leads to life-giving impact. And nothing, whether it's your past failure, past relationships, sexual attraction, gender dysphoria, interest, your appearance, your habits, your background, nothing changes the fact that strength has been placed inside every one of us in the room. And that just gives a man a little more strength and the good kind of pride, right? The kind of pride that can look another man in the face, or the type of courage that can allow us to face a challenge or face our fears, okay? Nothing can take it away, but masculinity is a choice, so it can be given away. But choosing to be masculine is something that is risky, but it is a momentum. I shared this quote. I'll share it again just as I finish this summary. It's from Larry Crabb, and it comes from this book over here, Men of Courage. It's a fantastic book. It says, masculinity is a strength and an energy, a natural momentum within the heart of every man, moving them to live a life in a particular way, live their life in a particular way. It's a momentum, so things get rolling, and things just go really, really well. Masculinity is a choice, and it's a risk, and then there are also threats that we need to be aware of. So just real quick, the first threat is our shadow. Our shadow is the cumulative pain, dysfunction, failure, weakness that follows a man. So we all have them. We usually don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about them. They're the things we're embarrassed of, or we try to cover up, okay? A masculine man deals with his shadow. He is not emasculated because he has a shadow, but he loses his strength when he doesn't deal with the shadow, because our shadows always deal with us. So a masculine man takes part in things, healing processes. A lot of times we think healing's just for women. No, a masculine man goes through the healing process and deals with his wounds. And he grows, and he's authentic, and he's open, and he shares with other people, and he's deeply connected, and he's dedicated to his friendships, and he might end up in counseling, and he might be in accountability groups, and he might go to these kinds of things because he's trying to deal with a shadow. So that's the way we deal with that first threat. The second threat is passivity, and passivity is the unwillingness to act when needed. So it can be... it's the unwillingness to speak up when called upon, to oppose that which is wrong, to resist that which is evil, to do what is good. A lot of times passivity just keeps us on the couch from doing what is good. So these are the things, two of the primary ways us men give away our strength. And our shadow and passivity, it's easy to be courageous and want to deal with it right now, but when life gets hard, and John described like when the heat goes up, that's when our shadow really shows itself. So a man must be ready to deal with those things. But here's what a man does. And so now on this side, you've kind of got three sections that Sean Hart did a great job. Thank you, Sean. You have a field, you have brothers, and you have fathers. These are three things that men do to increase in their masculinity, to stay healthy. Because eventually it's not just what a man is, but part of what makes a man is what he does. Okay? Action really, really matters. Our actions don't change our value when it comes to between us and God, but our actions certainly change the way people experience us, and we get to enjoy life. So the first one here, and then I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to give you guys a chance to discuss at your tables. But the first thing a man does, or the first investment he makes, is you can think of it this way: a man tends his field. Okay? And I'm going to use what Stephen Mansfield says about a field. And this is how he describes what a field is. A man tends his field. A field is the total commitment, obligations, and responsibilities that are around a man. Okay, so your field is the cumulative, it's the putting together of your commitments, your obligations, and your responsibilities. 1 Corinthians 16. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, do everything in love. And where are we supposed to do these things? But we're supposed to do them in our field. And so you could think of the field as your sphere of influence. You could think of your field as the lane that you get to run in, whatever illustration you want to use. But the field is your life and all of the things that God has put into your care. 1 Corinthians, if I were to sum it up this way, 16, 13, and 14, it would be pay attention to your field. Be present. Remember God and do things His way, and use your strength and your love to bring life, okay? That's the job of a man in his field. Robert Moore is an author of a good book that came out many years ago called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and the subtitle is Rediscovering the Archetypes of Mature Masculinity. And lots of men's ministries and books have kind of come out of this work that he did. But this is what he says is the job of a man with his field. Three primary things, okay? So this is his version of how a man tends his field. Number one, a man is to make sure that his field stays free of chaos. So a man notices dysfunction, chaos. He knows when the weeds are coming up. He knows when predators are in his field. Of course, to do this, you have to know your boundaries, right? You have to know what belongs to you, what's your responsibility, obligations, and commitments. You have to know that. But once you know it and you know the boundaries of your field, a man keeps his field free from chaos, which, by the way, means that a man at times will need to protect his field, okay? We live now in a culture where this is not asked of us very often, at least in a physical way. We don't have enemy armies coming into our village, and the men have to run out with whatever weapon they have to defend their field and their town. We don't have that. But there are threats in our homes to our kids and our wives and even to us and to our friends that we must fight against, that we must protect. And so protecting continues to be a part of what it means to be a man. It just can look very, very different. Okay, so number one, he keeps his field free from chaos. Number two, a man is meant to bless his field. He blesses his field with his words, with his presence, with his hard work, with his creativity, with his strength and his power, and most of all, with his love. So a man is meant to show up and literally to make people's lives better, okay, to bless it. Words are a powerful way of blessing. Presence is a powerful way of blessing. Power, strength, love, all of those things, okay? So men bless their fields. And then number three, men do this. When you enter your field, and after you've kept it free from chaos and you blessed it, a man is now then ready to bring out the potential and the purpose of everyone in that field, okay? So here's the idea. A man's job at this point is to bring out the creative purpose and the creative potential of everyone and everything in that field. And so let's say you have a son who's part of your field. One of the things that you will do in this idea is you will encourage your son to be a life-giving male someday. And you will try to reproduce your life inside of them. If you have a number of children, you bring out the potential and the beauty in all of your kids. You don't treat them just like they're all the same. But you bring out the creative potential and your desires for more life and more growth and more increase and multiplication. And so the way this idea of bringing out the creative potential, it can show up a number of different ways. This can be a guy encouraging his friend to keep fighting the fight that he's fighting against pornography. You're asking for more effort, man. Keep trying. More grace. You just ask for more and more of that. But it can also look like a man launching his daughter into adulthood, getting her ready to go off and be on her own. This is this idea of multiplying life. So we keep the field free from chaos, we bless it and keep it free from life. Boaz is an example of a man who tended his field, isn't he? He was in his field, so he was present. He noticed who was there. He moved towards Ruth, and he brought about life-giving impact. And I actually don't think it's a coincidence, although maybe it is, but I want to bring it out. So for you single guys, Boaz was tending his field. He was doing his duty when he met his wife, okay? He wasn't waiting to become a responsible man. He was living his life the best that he could in the direction that God had pointed him, and then all of a sudden, smoking hot Ruth shows up in the field, and he's got a wife. Okay? That's kind of how life should work. A man is tending his field, and then that's where you find your wife. Every man has a field. Even we have 10 and 12-year-old boys, young men in the room right now. They have fields, and their field is different than a grown man's field, but like in our home, our boys have some chores, so the part of their field is the responsibilities to contribute to our family and to the house. I have them working for free in the garage so that we can sell stuff, child labor, whatever it is, but they're contributing. A boy contributes. My boys go to school, and that's part of their field, and it's their responsibility to make sure they're doing well in school. And so we teach them that it's their responsibility to do their homework and to pay attention and get their assignments done. If they're on a team or in a band, it's their responsibility to practice. It's their responsibility to be a good teammate. So part of being a man is learning to tend your field no matter how big it is. The older we get, the larger our field should grow. Okay, so I'm just looking around in the room, and I see a number of guys that started being a part of Cornerstone years ago when you were single, and now you're married and have a career and you have kids. Your field has increased. Our field has increased, and that's now something that we take care of. Let me point out a little bit of a difference between obligations, responsibilities, and commitments. So an obligation is just the things that we know that we have to do because we just want to be, because we have to. And we just want to be a good person. So this can be caring for your aging parents, or this can be caring for younger children who maybe need someone to take care of them that are part of your family. On Sunday, I'm driving down to Alamosa to take care of my dad. This is an obligation that I gladly want to fulfill. This is part of my field. But we also have responsibilities, and so we're responsible for our health and our finances and paying taxes and our home and our car, and if you're a boss, your employees. We just have these different responsibilities. Those things are important. But commitments are what matter the most. And a lot of times, men define themselves by their obligations and their responsibilities rather than their commitments. And it should be the other way around. Commitments matter most, okay? Because commitments we get to choose, and most often our commitments are to people and to community, okay? So this is why commitments matter more. We have a choice in them. So you can make a commitment to a friendship or a group or a church or a wife or to a family. And these are the things that should be prioritized above everything else. Not everything in a man's field requires or should get equal energy from him. There should be an ordering of loves or prioritizing the things in a man's field. And a man's commitment should come towards the top. And so these are the things we choose. And by the way, a commitment is as good as our ability to be loyal to it, right? So your vows mean nothing if you are not faithful. So think of marriage for a moment. One of the greatest commitments a man can make, and there's layers of commitment within marriage. You're making a commitment to your wife. So I've made a commitment to Elise. I've made a commitment to God. I've also made the commitment when I married Elise to the idea of marriage. So I'm just not committing to her, but I'm committing to this institution that is very important, that shows the world something about God. When I got married, I also made a commitment to my family and her family. And so there are these layers of commitment, and a man must prioritize them. So hopefully God is somewhere near the top for you guys, and then your family comes next. And so for me, it's the Lord, it's Elise, our marriage, and then my 4 boys, Cole, Wyatt, Levi. Then it's the rest of our family and our friends. Next, when it comes to priority of commitments, it's the community of God for me. And a lot of you might say, well, of course, Brian, you're a pastor. But let me tell you something. My job as a pastor, my job is way down the list of my commitments and the priority of them. Because even if I didn't work here as a pastor, I'd be in this room sharing life with you guys. Because I'm committed to the family of God and the life that we have together and that we need one another. And then for me, later on comes my work and other things. Wrestling and the Broncos they're trying to creep their way up, but I keep pushing them down. You constantly have to reorder your loves. When a man doesn't have commitments to people, it is a sign that there is something wrong in the inside. I mean, there's just not this inner strength to say, I promise to you, I will close my options. I will say yes right now, not knowing what the future will look like, and I will put my best energy into making sure that this commitment I'm making right now, this promise I'm making right now, will turn out good. There are a lot of men today who can't make commitments because they're terrified of what could be. Let me tell you guys something. If you ask the older men in the room who have made good commitments in their life, there's not a man in this room that would say, I knew exactly how it would turn out. There's not a man in this room that would tell you that they know exactly how it will continue to turn out. You make a commitment, it's a step of faith, and you spend the rest of your life making sure that's the right choice. And God gives you everything you need to do it. Now think about what a passive man can do to his field, right? He's not keeping it free from chaos. He's not blessing it. He's not bringing about life. What happens when a man doesn't tend his field? It's not just like, it's not ideal. People suffer. The field falls apart and things don't work. And everyone else in that field tries to do the job of the man, and then in that process, they're hurt themselves. Larry Crabb in that book over there describes what happens when a man feels insecure or not competent. One of the things we do, so a lot of times when we're in our field, we feel like we're out of our comfort zone. But when we're in that field and we're out of our comfort zone, what we need to continue to do is remember God, move towards others, and bring about life-giving impact. But what we do with our passivity and our shadow that's showing up is we want to retreat because we feel uncomfortable. And we give away our masculine strength, and we stop tending to our relationships, and we stop tending to the things that are our obligations, responsibilities, and commitments. And so this is what I'd like you to do now so that we can break it up and you guys can spend some time thinking since this isn't Sunday, and then you can do some sharing. You have that first section. I just want you to jot down some things that come to your mind when you think about your field. What is it that God has given you to steward? What is it that he's put in your care? Okay? And you can even include, if you've got some skill or talent that needs to be shared, you can put that down. If you have some grace, like some form of art or, your ability to coach, put that down, okay? These are things that are part of your field. If you've been given a lot of money, put that down. These are all things that fall within a man's field, okay? So I want you to write down some of those things, what is a part of your field, and then when you're ready, and we don't have a ton of time, I want you to share those with the guys at your table. And then I'll bring us back together in a moment. Okay, guys, we'll come back together. I didn't give you a ton of time, but we're going to do this in three sections here. I want to encourage you, this is me as a pastor here, for you not to see, whether this is your church or you have another church, to not see your church as an obligation, but to see your church as a commitment, okay? There's a difference. And a lot of people grow up thinking church is an obligation, but church is a choice and your commitment to dive in, to be connected, to be a part of what's happening, to be a steward of the good and the bad. So to me, if you're walking with Jesus, the family of God is a commitment that we should make. All right, second thing here, we're going to go to this illustration of a chain. And so you guys have a chain link, or the closest thing we could get to it without having to cut them. This represents our life, what we're in control of, where we start and end. But this is what I want us to think of, that we belong to a long line, and the health of a man depends on the type of chain that he attaches himself into, okay? All of us belong to certain versions of community. All of us will leave a certain type of legacy. But the type of chain that you choose to live within is something that will have a profound effect on the people whose lives you're meant to touch, and also on yours. And so I'm going to describe it two ways. We're meant to be a part of a chain of brothers, okay? You can think of it horizontally, but a chain of fathers as well, okay? Let me give you an illustration. I heard this when I went over to Redding, California to recruit Aaron to come join staff. The speaker that week told this story, and it makes the point of the importance of brothers and fathers in becoming men and continuing in masculinity. This is a story that comes from a British anthropologist, Victor Turner, who spent a lot of his life in Africa studying rites of passages and what it is that a tribe will do to help a boy become a man. And one of his favorite stories is of this one particular tribe, that every year, the men of the tribe who lived separate from the women of the tribe would enter into the women's side of the tribe, and they would kidnap all the boys who were about 13 years old. Because from birth till about age 13, the boys lived with the women, okay? And then the men lived separate in the tribe, and somehow they came together to have more babies. But this is how this tribe lived. The men, one night, would sneak into the women's side of the camp. They would kidnap the 13-year-old boys, and it would be a sudden and traumatic and really a scary and painful time for most of the people in the tribe. The men would grab the boys, they would take them out to the bush, they would circumcise them, and then they would leave them there for several months. Okay, so let's, bloody up his penis and leave him out with predators. So that's what they would do. And so think about it. When you're 13, and you're left out there, and at first same thing happened every year. the boys would kind of separate from one another, even though they had known these other boys their entire life. They would separate from one another, and they would kind of sulk, and they would feel sorry for themselves, and they would be afraid. And one boy would be up in one tree, and another one would be up in another tree, and one would be sitting down somewhere else. And they would just be by themselves, separate, not really ready to do anything. But as the days went on, the boys began to come together because they realized that they needed to find each other in new and meaningful ways to survive the challenge. So whether it was one boy saying, hey guys, we need to work together to survive this, or they just began to do that naturally without anyone saying this, they would always, every year, a few days in, the individuals would come together to be a community of survival. And so the boys would begin to organize things, and they would take jobs, and it's your job to be on guard right now. It's your job to cook. It's your job to make a fire, and they would work together. Once a month, the men of the tribe would come out, and they would be with the boys, and they would kind of debrief their experiences. And so the boys would tell stories of failure, and they would laugh together. But also at this time, it was the fathers of the tribe that would come, and they would share the secrets of the tribe that the boys had never, ever heard. Because these were the secrets that came from the men. Now, they had heard secrets from the women, but they were now hearing the secrets from the men, and they were hearing their history. And the men were telling them what it means to be a man in their culture and to be masculine in this way. And they would stay out there, and this would happen for several months. When the initiation was done, all of the men of the tribe would go out, and they'd gather the boys, and it would be different. This would be a celebration, and then it would be this parade back into the village where the entire village was ready to receive not the boys that had left, but the new men who were being welcomed back into the tribe. Every year this happened. Victor, he was surprised to see this, Victor Turner. He was surprised to see that every year this happened, even though it was traumatic and sad when the boys were taken out of the village, when men were brought back in, it was a celebration for everyone. The women, the older men would celebrate. They'd reminisce about what it was like to be a boy and then to be initiated. They'd celebrate what it's like to initiate a new man into his manhood. And then those boys that had become men, they would come in proud, ready to take their place as men of the tribe. Brothers and fathers were the key part of that initiation. Now, we need that as guys because we need masculinity modeled for us. We need real masculinity encouraged and praised when it's seen. And we need a number of guys. We need to be a part of a chain that's moving in the same direction of fathers, or brothers and fathers. So let me talk a little bit about brotherhood, which is the idea of friendship. And, there's a difference between having a friend and just having like drinking buddies or your football buddies or your music buddies, right? There's a difference. Those guys you might just hang out with, but a friend has a purpose. And a friend really is a commitment. And so here's what's sad. As most men age and we get a career, a wife, children, we isolate ourselves from friendship. And so you might have a few buddies, but they are not friends. Or the men that you think of as your friends are men from college or from the military, and you refer back to those are my closest friends. The problem is, though, they can't act as a friend because they're not close enough to see what's actually happening in your life. Statistics tell us, and studies tell us, that most men don't have one close friend that they would know that they would call if things were falling apart in their home. Or if they were away from town and something was happening and their wife needed help, they wouldn't know who to call because most men don't have a close friend. Men are committing suicide at a rate 4 times higher than women right now, and most of the time it has something to do with loneliness and not having a friend. There is no band of brothers being built among grown men. Millennials, we're told that you guys do a little better, so good job, all right? But you have the same kind of, you have a warning that comes as you make more and more commitments. Those commitments at times can isolate you from other men. So you have to continue to pour into it. But friendship is powerful. It's a gift. You can see some of the proverbs behind me. One of the wisest, most powerful men, anyone that could have done it on his own, says some great things about friendship. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And friendship has a purpose. Proverbs 27, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So one way to measure whether or not you're in a chain, a band of brothers, is to ask yourself the question, when is the last time someone in my life irritated me? because that's kind of what it means to be sharpened. When is the last time that someone pressed up against some character flaw of me, or some behavior, or some dysfunctional behavior in me, and they pushed up against me and it irritated in me in such a way that I was being sharpened? When's the last time that happened? If you don't have that at the top of your mind, or you can't think of that pretty quickly of something that's occurred in the recent past, you probably don't have friends, or you don't have friends close enough to you to be able to challenge you. And likewise, when is the last time you sharpened another man? Okay, because friendship is not just a gift that we get from other people, it is a commitment that we make to others. And so we want to be good friends. I have a lot of friends in this room. And we have these moments. It's not all the time, but you need a friend that sharpens you. Friends not only sharpen you, but they help you deal with your shadow. So Proverbs 27 describes it this way. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Better is an open reprimand that is concealed in love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but the enemy multiplies kisses. So not only does a friend help us deal with our shadow, but we actually need a band of brothers, and we need real friends to help us see our shadow, because there is always something behind us that we cannot see. There's a part of my shadow that's behind me that I cannot see. And so I rely on my wife to tell me that. But I also need my friends to help me see my shadow, whatever that might be. And so friends help us this way. A band of brothers. Here's the other thing friends do, and a band of brothers do. When you belong to a chain of friends, okay, of course, you're just in charge of your part. This is where you end and someone else begins, but you're joined with others. But when you're in a chain, and the reason chains are effective tools is because the strength of one link is shared among the other links, and the burden or the weight that the chain is carrying is distributed among all the links, right? That's why this is a helpful tool, because strength is shared, and so is burden. So is the weight. A band of brothers is to act that way. So let's use an example of like pornography. Let's say you have a group of friends, and maybe you have some other older men in your life, that you guys get together and you talk about this struggle. In one band of brothers, you might have one guy who feels like death in that moment. He feels like a failure. He's full of shame. He hasn't had a day of victory in years. But next to him is another man that might just be 2 months down the road saying, you know what, I'm not free from this, or I don't even know if that's even possible. But he might say, I am not struggling the way I used to. So guess what happens? That hope and that plan and that strength is shared with the guy that feels hopeless. But also connected in that link might be someone who's 2 years down the road. And he can say, guys, hey, I know you feel hopeless right now, but you don't need to. There is hope, and there is a plan that works. So we need to be a part of a chain that shares strength and shares burden. Do you have men like that? Or a better question is, are you a man like that? That you're willing to share your strength and the burden with others. You can see the Ecclesiastes passage behind me. It starts off great. It says, there was a man basically who was alone, and he was doing a lot of things well, and his field was doing well, and his job was going well. And he asks the question, he goes, what's the point of all this? I think he's a very successful, rich man. And I think his priorities of his field were out of order. And he said, you know what really matters is it's friends, it's people, it's relationships. And then he begins to talk about this idea that the burden is shared and strength is shared. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. That's a chain. The band of brothers is also meant to be a motivating thing. I wish I had time to thank all of the many guys in this room that inspire me to be greater in certain areas than I am, or healthier in certain ways. I've learned how to deal with my finances from men in this church. I've learned how to be a husband from men in this church. I've learned how to be a dad from men in this church. I've become a better coach because of men in this church. Aaron Wardle is working on me to be able to talk to women in a normal way. So he's helping me, another man helping me deal with something, to be a part of something. Okay? We help each other. This is motivating. There's a cool story that I read this summer that comes from World War II. The U.S. was getting ready to send in the first paratroop units into combat. So we weren't the first ones to ever come up with it, but this was our first paratrooper unit that was being sent into combat, and they were going into the North Africa campaign and then as part of D-Day. And one of the officers that I was reading said, there are a lot of officers that just rely on screaming and creative name-calling to get those guys when they're afraid to jump out of the airplane. Okay, so the door opens up, it's dark, you feel the wind, they're going into battle, men freeze with fear. And he goes, some guys just scream at him and yell at him. So that doesn't really work. Some other guys shame them. So think of the names that you might call a guy to shame him up on an airplane. Okay, you can think of them. He said, shaming actually works. You shame a guy enough, he'll jump out of the airplane. But this is what this wise officer said. He said, I don't want to take guys into battle who are ashamed. I don't want to shame them into jumping out of the airplane or facing their fears. He said, I want a band of brothers who can't imagine leaving their brother behind. He said, I want love to be the motivation to jump out of the airplane. See the difference? Screaming, shame, but how about love and connection? That I'm going to stay in this game. I'm going to take care of my link in the chain because it affects the guy next to me. That was the idea. You are a link in a chain. And a lot of guys are just takers of the strength, and they just give the burden. But we are meant to be guys who share our strength and also bear the burden with other people. And that will not happen if you are a single link. You must put yourself in relationship around other guys so that you can be a part of something much stronger than you are. So now we're going to break, and this is what I'd like you to do. I want you to think through kind of your band of brothers. And I want you to be honest with yourself. Are there men in your life right now close enough or in proximity enough that they can see what's happening in your life? Do they see how your wife feels when you talk to her? Do they see how you parent? Do they see whether or not you're drinking too much? Are they close enough that you're around each other that you feel like you have open lines of communication? I want you to be honest. Do you have men that close? And then I want you to write them down, okay? And just do some reflection about that. Then I want you to just share any thoughts that you have about this idea of sharing strength, but also sharing burden with other guys. So on your own, you guys go for it. Okay, guys. One thing I'd like you to do is if you notice, or maybe you've known it for a while, that you're kind of alone, and you might be around a bunch of people, you might be in a sea of casual relationships, okay, but you don't have your guys, okay, you don't have your friends. I want you, even just as I finish, just write down what you will do to remedy that, okay? Because listen, it's your responsibility, it's my responsibility to move towards other guys and to make commitments and to find them, okay? And you keep working until you find the guys. And this is a great place to find them. There's a lot of great places to find them. But it's our responsibility to build these friendships, okay? It's not someone else's. All right, the second part of the chain, or the idea of the chain, is that we are a link on a chain that runs vertical, and this is the chain of fathers to sons, and then again from fathers to sons. We're all part of this big story of fathers to their sons, and this continuing on where we pass down legacy. This is what fathers do. Fathers leave a legacy, and it can be an absent legacy, it can be a painful legacy, or it can be a life-giving legacy. And there are a lot of good men in this room that the reason that you're the way you are right now is because you've had a great dad in your life, or you've been fathered by many great men, and they have shared with you their strength, and that is extended to you. Here's the idea that I want us to kind of leave with when we talk about fathering. Whatever it is that we've received, we want to leave the chain stronger, okay? Whatever it is that we've received from our earthly fathers or our spiritual fathers, we want to increase, and we want to pass that down in even a greater way to those that we father, okay? So we don't just enjoy when we've had something good given to us, but we take it very serious, and we steward what's been given to us, and we want to pass that on in a healthy way. Dads are meant to initiate men into manhood. So last week I said something on Sunday in my message that my wife Elise is just as responsible that our boys would turn out masculine as I am, and I believe that, okay? But she has a different role than I do. A man must be initiated into new levels of maleness or masculinity, real masculinity, by another man, okay? A woman cannot initiate a man into new levels. And so that's why that story is so great back from Africa. A man must be there along the way to initiate a man into deeper levels, to higher levels. This is what the initiator does. The initiator with the boy reminds the boy that he's not just flesh and blood, that there's more to life than what he can just see. That his job, the father who is initiating, his job is to prove to the young boy that he's not simply a machine good for war or reproduction or survival or just meant to perform, but rather that he has great creative potential inside of him and meaning inside of him, and he is meant to leave a life-giving impact and have a legacy. See, this is what dads have to teach their boys. It's not just about being a nice little guy. It's not just about getting good grades. It's not just about doing well in whatever thing that you're interested in. But there is meaning and there's creative purpose inside of you, and we bring that out in men. Bring that out in boys. And so the obvious application of fathers is an earthly father to their son. So let's just raise hands if whoever in here is a father, whether it's to daughters or sons. Okay. This is one of the top commitments that's in our field. And our families not only deserve, but they need our very best, which starts with our presence. And I know families look different, and people work different, and life works differently. But you will not leave the legacy you want. I will not leave the legacy I want unless we are with our children, okay? We have to spend time with them. I'm very grateful for this from my dad. So my dad is a good man. He didn't know the Lord when we were growing up, so he was only able to pass certain things down. My dad was very busy. He ran a business, had a number of different businesses. But my dad was always at our stuff. He did his best to be there. He coached us. He cheered us on. He yelled at the refs. He came to the band concerts, even though he didn't care about it, but he was there. And then my dad was there in the evenings most of the time, and we had dinner together. And a man doesn't have to do those two things to be present, but he must find different ways to be present with his children. And one of the gifts my dad gave us was presence. And so I think of this chain, I'm like, that's part of the legacy my dad gave me, to teaching me to be present with my children. There's a reason that our family looks the way it does today. It's because Elisa's dad was present in their family, and my dad was present in our family, and so we are there for our boys. So we pass this on. We make sure that whatever we give is better than that which we received. Now, because a dad's role is so significant, I'm talking earthly fathers, when they do not show up in our lives the way they need to, we are left wounded. And I just want to talk about this for a moment, okay? Because this is part of our shadow. We deal with this with the band of brothers, but also other fathers step in to heal this. But I want to mention a few wounds that show up from a man, wounds that he can get from his father, okay? So I'll just go through them. A man can be wounded if he did not receive a blessing from his father. And I don't mean just one moment where the father puts his hand on him and blesses him. But a man can be wounded when he never heard powerful, loving, affirming words from his dad. If he didn't hear from his dad, if you didn't hear from your dad that he was proud of you, that what you did was awesome, that he believed in you, that the picture that you drew at school that looks terrible, you brought it home, and he goes, this is fantastic, it's the best thing I've ever seen, and put it on the fridge. If you didn't receive that kind of thing, then you can be wounded. You might not be able to name it, but we know that these things stay with guys, okay? And here's why dealing with wounds is important, because there are a lot of men who continue to be hurt by their dad today, decades later, because they haven't been healed or redeemed. Second wound, a man can be wounded from his father who was not there. He just wasn't present, so he was an absent dad. He was a workaholic. Maybe he was sick. He was gone. He was dead, okay? These are wounds that we get because we needed this presence in our life and it wasn't there for whatever reason. Third wound that comes from our dads is if you have a dad that can be overly critical, say harsh words. See, this is something I have to be careful of with our boys. I've hurt them this way because I can say harsh things. I can be overly critical. But what happens is when you hear them as a boy from your dad and you hear things like you're weak or you're a disappointment or you're lazy, that just, it's like a tape recorder in your head, isn't it? Some people's words have more power. Here's the fourth wound. This is a wound that a lot of men today have because they didn't grow up with a father. They've never been corrected or disciplined in a loving way by their dad. This is a wound. And it will show up in the fact that you can't take feedback or criticism from a boss or a coach someday, whatever it might be. Fathers have weight. And we can either make the next link in the chain weaker or stronger. So I mentioned my dad earlier. My dad strengthened the chain for our family, okay? He grew up in a family of ragers and alcoholics, men who didn't keep their promises to their wives, men who failed to tend to their family, that were losing jobs. The family was constantly struggling financially because they would just not show up to work, or they just got mad at their boss and they'd quit, and they just weren't responsible. This is the legacy of the men in my dad's family, of the Carluccis. My dad took what he was given and made something better. My dad was a present dad. He was a dad who worked hard. He was a dad who handled the struggle of alcoholism so that wasn't something that ruled him, okay? My dad gave all of his sons a gift because he took what was given to him and made it better. That's what dads are meant to do. There's one part, though, about my dad, and this is where we get into this idea of spiritual fathers, where he wasn't able to give us what we needed, and so other men needed to step in. So we're called to be earthly fathers if you have children, but we're all called, I believe this, every one of us, we're all called to be spiritual fathers to many men, okay? So we have one dad in life. Maybe you can have two if you have an adopted dad. But really, you have one dad, but you can be fathered by many men, okay? And this isn't Sean Kemp. All right, if you know who that is. Only the old guys know, never mind. One dad, but you can be fathered by many men. So my dad was not able to extend in this chain a spiritual legacy. I wasn't taught by my dad to read the scriptures, to revere God, to pray. I wasn't taught by my dad to do that. But that is a legacy that a man must leave. And so in our family, I was the top. I was the first Carlucci male to bow his heart to Jesus and to walk with him. And now I have sons that are doing that, and I look forward to my grandsons doing that. But in our family, in the Carlucci family, I was the first, and then my sons were the next, and my brothers then followed. But our dad didn't share that with us. But guess what happens? This is what's so great about God. Because he is the perfect father, he sends other fathers to come and father us. And so I had other men who kept coming into my life at different places, and they understood this idea. They understood that, in a sense, I was their responsibility. And then they chose to make a commitment to me. And so they began to pour into my life. And they began to father me spiritually. So I learned to pray. And I learned to read the scriptures. And I learned to be loving. And I learned to serve. And I learned how to be a dad and a husband from other men along the way. And I'm so grateful. But then I'm called not just to father my own sons, but other men along the way. Because there are a lot of dad gaps in all of our lives. Here's what's neat for my family, though. I was the first. But in 1999, when I was a freshman at college, my dad gave his life to Jesus. So guess what happens? I move off the top, and my dad is there, and then it's me, and now my sons. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But one of the reasons it turned out that way is because other men stepped into my life and fathered me along the way. So there's two applications here. Who's fathering you? Who are you letting father you, bring out things in you? And who are you fathering? If you want to find a scripture that makes this point, 1 Corinthians chapter 4, you can see it behind me. Paul is saying, hey, you have lots of teachers, okay? Guardians is the word that shows up in the version you see, but other versions say you have countless advisors, you have many teachers, but you don't have many fathers. This is what you do with a father that's different from a teacher. You learn from a teacher, but you imitate a father. You learn from a teacher, but you imitate a father. There are guys in the room with tons of dad wounds. The way that is healed is that you allow God, and God will provide this, but also other men need to step up and take this place, that you allow them to come into your life and father you in the things that matter. You learn from them, you listen from them, and most of all, you imitate their life. You don't just learn from them as a teacher, but you let them father you. You imitate the way they live. I mean, I think the church has endless potential because we have all of these things right here. Right? We have all of these things. Everything we need to fill in the gaps, to overcome our shadow, to push through passivity is here. But it doesn't happen when guys just simply say, you know what, it's just me. And I fail to be a part of a chain that going this way and a chain going this way. Eric Metaxas, in the introduction to the book 7 Men, and it's not over there, but it's a great book, Stories of Great Men, George Washington, Jackie Robinson, I'd recommend it. He says this, he says, there is something vital to the idea of fatherhood, and it gives us a clue to the secret of a great man. But we have to point out that a man needn't be an actual father to bear the traits of a very good father. George Washington, Pope John Paul, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, these are people he wrote about in the book. He says they were not earthly fathers, but they were spiritual fathers. Being a father is not a biological thing. If we think of fatherhood, think of the fatherhood of God, we get a picture of someone who is strong and loving and who sacrifices himself for those that he loves. That's a picture of real fatherhood and real manhood. We will never live out full masculinity unless we are fathered, unless we begin to father others. Okay? It goes both ways. So we don't have time to talk anymore, but I do want you to think about this, and then John's going to come up and do something as we end. But here's the idea, or the question. You belong to this long line, this legacy of your family. You belong to a long line of a spiritual legacy. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you belong to it, whether you want to or not. Are you strengthening the chain? Are you just taking from it? Are you just sharing burden? Or are you taking what has been given to you, and are you strengthening the chain? Are you sharing your strength along the chain? Is it being shared among other people? Are you taking those things serious? Because that's really the application for the message today, which is, what are you doing with your link in the chain? Is it more or is it less? Is it less life or is it more life? Okay? And this applies to brotherhood, but it also applies to this idea of fatherhood. So I just want to pray and just ask that the Holy Spirit would, seal this in for us, and then John's going to come up. So let's bow our heads. Lord, I just ask that whatever I shared that's from you would ring true this week, that you would remind us of it. For this idea, God, that we are, of course, individuals and independent, but we choose to belong to a community. God, I pray that you would help us move more and more into healthy masculinity as we embrace this idea of friends and being part of a chain and a band of brothers. I pray, God, that we would submit ourselves to being fathered by other men, that you would put good men in our lives, that we might imitate their lives, but also, God, that we would say yes to the commitment as we father them. So bless the chain, Lord. Bless the line. And I pray whatever it is that we've received, that it would be strengthened and it would be better. May we steward it that way. May we be life-giving. Help us to be men who live like you and live out real masculinity. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, John.